Go.
Okay, today we're going to go through a procedure to hinge up a control surface on the Black Horse Gilmore Red Lion. The same procedure can be used for all of the control surfaces on the aircraft, from the ailerons, rudder, elevators, so on. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get all of our materials together to make sure everything is close at hand and we don't wind up feeling rust as we're actually working with the epoxy. I'm not going to actually epoxy the surface on today so that we have time to move through all the different steps without worrying about time. Okay, what we need is our control surface that we're going to install, something to mix our epoxy on. I use flat toothpicks to both mix the epoxy and apply it to the surface. We've got our hinges, a hobby knife with a sharp blade on it. We're using 15-minute epoxy for two reasons. One is it gives us ample time to work with the four hinges and sets up quick enough that the epoxy doesn't tend to migrate where we don't want it. We also have some 70-30 isopropyl alcohol and water to use for cleanup, several paper towels torn in half also to use for cleanup, and several pieces of tape to hold the control surface in place when we're done. First thing we want to do is prep everything that we're going to be installing. Black Horse has done a very good job of drilling the pockets for the hinges. When they open the pockets up after they cover the model, they use it like a hot soldering iron, and that can tend to leave a little bit of ridge. So the first thing we do to prep here is we use a sharp hobby knife and cut any ridges off. Also, there tends to be some material inside the hinge, and we'll just clean that out with our hobby knife. Also, something I found out that's quite kind of helps us with our install is install your control horn ahead of time. Number one, it's easier to work with the surface before it's installed, and two, it kind of reminds you which side is right side up and which is the bottom when you're in a hurry. The next thing we want to prep is our hinges. These are hinge point type hinges, and what we do is we'll take some 70-30 IPA and we'll clean the hinge barrels themselves because sometimes they can have mold release material on them. The next thing we want to do is oil our hinges or lubricate them. This does two things. It helps our hinge move smoothly, and it also helps prevent the epoxy from sticking to the hinge and seizing it up. You can lube the hinges pretty much with anything. One thing I use is a Q-tip and some Vaseline.
It doesn't stay in focus.
And you just lube the hinges on one side, turn it around, lube it on the other side, and your hinge is ready to install. One thing you do, if you do want to be careful of, if you're using oil, you want to make sure it does not go onto the hinge barrel itself. Once you got those prepped, go ahead and set those aside. Now we're ready for the install itself. What we'll do is go ahead and mix up our epoxy. Again, we can use our toothpicks. Mix up our epoxy, scoop up some of the epoxy, fill the hinge pocket. Do this 2 or 3 times until the hinge pocket is completely full. Set your stick down. Prepare your, wet your paper towel with the alcohol, and clean off any epoxy that happens to be on the outside. Once you take a swipe with this, fold it over before you use it again, because sometimes the epoxy can stick on the paper towel and it can wind up accidentally being rubbed on someplace you don't want it to go. Next, we'll install our hinge. Put it into the pocket. As you do, give it a twist and pull out just a little bit and twist again. What that does is it coats the entire inside of the pocket and your hinge barrel. Press the hinge in until the head of the screw is flush with the outside of the pocket. Once you're there, angle the hinge up just a little bit. What you want to do is you want this 90 degrees to your surface hinge line. and just let it sit there. And move on to your next hinge. Repeat the process. Scoop up your epoxy, fill the hole several times till you know it's good and full. Fresh paper towel, wipe the excess off, and install your hinge again. Again, doing a twist, pull out a little bit, twist, and push in, and angle your hinge up. Don't push it all the way up like this, because what that'll do is that'll pull the hinge out of the pocket. We don't want that. So push it back in until the head is flush with the end. Once you got all your hinges in, step back, take a look, make sure they're all parallel with each other, and they're all 90 degrees to the hinge line. What we want to do at this point is let the epoxy do its initial cure. Leave your hinges pointed up a little bit like that. That way you can take a look and make sure none of them drift off center. If any of these hinges are off center after the control surface is installed, it will bind around center, causing control problems and centering problems on your servo. Once your hinges are set up,
Got 3 minutes left.
angle your hinges down so that they're all even. Fill all the pockets in your control surface. Wipe with epoxy again,
No, not with epoxy.
or wipe with the 70/30 IPA. Clean them up good. Line your hinges up into the pockets and press your surface all the way up against the stab. Once you've got it there, we're going to hold it in place with the tape. Top and bottom. And let that set up. After it's set up for about 30 minutes, take your tape off briefly, move your control surface through to free the hinges up a little bit, and retape again. And then you want to let it set for the full cure time, usually overnight. While this sets up, you can move on to your other surfaces. Once the full cure time is done, you can remove the tape, free your control surfaces up, and you're done. That's all there is to it.